Okay, so snack foods, right? I gotta admit, some of my favorites, well, let's just say they might be in the hot seat a little bit after this deep dive. We're talking about those tempting treats, you know, the ones you just can't resist. But hold on, because some folks are saying those snacks, yeah, they shouldn't even be on the shelves.
Interesting, right.
It is. So where'd all this come from?
Well, it all started with this wave of proposed bans on certain snack foods.
And we're not talking some no-name brands here. This is serious stuff.
Oh, absolutely not. We're talking big names. Lucky Charms, Skittles, even those Flamin' Hot Cheetos. Yeah, all because of ingredients that have some folks using the word scary.
Scary. I mean, come on, is it really that serious? Should we be ditching all our favorite snacks?
Well, that's where things get interesting. You see, these news stories, they tend to simplify what's actually a really complex issue. Like, we hear chemicals are bad, and we jump to conclusions, but the truth is, it's way more nuanced than that.
So it's not as simple as seeing a long, impossible-to-pronounce ingredient on the label and running for the hills.
Not quite. The FDA, for example, they have this whole system for figuring out if an ingredient is safe to use in our food.
Okay, so the FDA is kind of like the gatekeeper, making sure the ingredients are safe before they end up in our favorite snacks.
You got it. They consider things like dosage, how much of the ingredient we're actually eating and whether there's any real scientific evidence to suggest it's harmful at those levels.
So, kind of like anything else, a little bit might be fine, but too much is a problem.
Precisely. And that's where that generally recognized as safe designation comes in, or GRAS, as you might have seen on label.
Right, GRAS. I've definitely seen that. So how does that whole thing work?
Well, the FDA uses GRAS to classify substances that are added to food. It's based on a really thorough review of all the scientific data, and it helps to ensure that what we're putting in our bodies isn't going to have any bad effects.
Makes sense. So the FDA is looking out for us, but what about all these banned ingredients we keep hearing about? It's like, if they're already in our food, what's being done?
That's the thing about science, right? It's always evolving. Sometimes new research pops up and changes our understanding of an ingredient's safety. When that happens, the FDA can revoke that GRAS designation, essentially banning the ingredient from being used in food.
So it can go from all good to banned like that?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Do you have an example of that?
Sure. Take Brominated Vegetable Oil, or BVO for short.
BVO, now that does sound kind of familiar. Wasn't that used in some sodas?
Exactly. BVO was used to prevent the separation of citrus flavors in drinks, kept that cloudy orange appearance in some sodas.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so what happened there?
Well, recent studies, they started raising some red flags about potential health effects. And guess what? The FDA took notice. Now they no longer allow BVO in our food.
Wow, so even something as common as a bottle of orange soda can be affected by these changing regulations.
Absolutely. And it's not always just about the science itself either. Public perception, consumer advocacy, all those things play a huge role in shaping food regulations.
So it's a two-way street. The FDA is looking out for us based on, like you said, the best available science. But at the same time, consumers have a voice in what they, well, in this case, eat.
Exactly. Speaking of ingredients that have caused quite a stir, let's talk about red dye 3. That vibrant red color you often see in candies.
Oh, yeah. I have a feeling this one's going to be good. Let's dive in.
Okay.
Red dye 3. So it's in a lot of those, like, bright red candies, the ones that always catch your eye at the checkout. What's the story there?
Well, red dye 3, or erythrocene, as it's also known, is an interesting case, yeah. It's actually derived from petroleum.
Petroleum? Wait, seriously? Like the stuff we put in our cars?
Yep, that's the one. And here's where it gets kind of wild. So it's still FDA approved for use in food and even drugs, but get this, it's banned in cosmetics and, topical drugs.
Hold on. It's banned in cosmetics
because studies have linked it to cancer. In animals, that is.
Okay, so banned in the stuff we put on our bodies, but okay, for the stuff we put in our bodies, I don't know about that. Something seems off about that.
Yeah, it definitely highlights just how complicated these decisions really are. The FDA argues that the way that red dye 3 can potentially cause cancer, at least in those specific animal studies, while it doesn't directly translate to humans.
So different standards for what goes in versus what goes on. I'm not sure I find that very reassuring.
It's a point of contention for sure, and it gets even more complicated.
Oh, how so?
Right now, the FDA is actually reviewing a petition to just completely repeal red dye 3's use in food.
Really? Based on what?
Well, it all comes down to something called the Delaney Clause.
Delaney Clause? That sounds pretty official. What is that exactly?
In the simplest terms, the Delaney Clause basically says that if any additive is found to cause cancer, and this is the important part, in either humans or animals at any dose, it's a no-go.
So zero tolerance.
Pretty much.
Well, that seems pretty clear-cut.
Right. You would think. But the science isn't always so black and white. The FDA has to weigh all of the existing data, the potential risks, the benefits. It's a balancing act, for sure.
Okay, so red dye 3 is in a kind of regulatory limbo right now then.
You could say that.
Okay. What about this titanium dioxide I keep hearing about? Honestly, that just sounds like, I don't know, something that belongs in paint, not in my pantry.
You know what? You're not wrong. Titanium dioxide IS, a white pigment used in paint. But here's the thing. It's also really common in food.
Get out. Seriously. I had no idea. What's it doing in our food?
It's all about creating that bright white color. You'll find it in candies, frosting, even some processed cheeses.
No way. Okay, so what's the issue then? Why are people concerned about it?
Well, much like red dye 3, it's facing some increased scrutiny these days. There's a recent petition that's calling for the FDA to revoke its use.
And the basis for that is?
A lot of it stems from a 2021 opinion from the European Food Safety Agency. Basically, they couldn't rule out potential DNA damage from titanium dioxide nanoparticles.
Nanoparticles. Okay, now we're getting into some serious science here. Break it down for me. What exactly are those, and why should we be worried about them?
So imagine particles so tiny, so incredibly small, they can actually interact with our bodies on a cellular level. We're talking about getting right down to the nitty-gritty of our cells.
Okay, and I'm guessing that's where things get a little dicey.
Exactly. The concern is that these tiny, tiny particles of titanium dioxide, well, they might be small enough to actually pass into our cells and potentially cause some damage, like even leading to things like cancer.
Okay, yeah, that's concerning. I'll be honest, I've never even thought about what happens to those ingredients at such a microscopic level. So it sounds like there are some valid concerns about both red dye 3 and titanium dioxide, but the FDA still allows them, right? At least for now.
For now, yeah. It's a complicated issue for sure, with no easy answers. Like we said, it's about weighing the potential risks and benefits, and in some cases, the science is still being researched.
This is really making me think twice about those ingredient lists. What's next? Potassium bromate. That one sounds kind of intense, like something you'd find in a chemistry set.
This one is a little more straightforward, actually. Potassium bromate. You'll find it in bread.
Bread? Really? What's it doing in there?
It acts as a flour improver. Basically, it strengthens the dough and helps to create those nice, well-risen loaves we all love.
Oh, so it's all about the texture, that picture-perfect bread we see in all the commercials.
That's the one. But, and this is a big but, potassium bromate has been on the controversial list for a while. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies it as possibly carcinogenic to humans.
Okay, yeah, possibly carcinogenic is definitely not something I want to see next to the word bread.
It's actually banned in a lot of countries, including the entire European Union and Canada.
Wait, seriously, banned over there but still allowed here? What gives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The U.S. still allows potassium bromate, but under very specific conditions. Like, it has to fully convert to bromide during baking, and the residual amount in the final bread can't be above a certain limit.
So kind of a fine line for bakers who use it.
Yeah.
Okay, what about this propylparaben? I feel like I've heard that one before somewhere.
You've probably seen it listed on cosmetics and personal care products. Propylparaben and its related parabens are common preservatives used to help prevent things from going bad too quickly.
Right. Paraben-free, I see that everywhere. Like it's supposed to be a good thing, but I never really understood why.
The concern with parabens, including propylparaben, is that they can potentially disrupt our hormones.
Disrupt our hormones. In what way?
Well, essentially, they can mimic estrogen in the body. Some studies suggest links to endocrine disruption, but more research is definitely needed.
Endocrine disruption, yeah, that doesn't sound good.
It's definitely something to be aware of. That's why you see a lot of companies offering those paraben-free alternatives now. Having said that, the FDA still considers propylparaben safe at the levels it's currently used in food and cosmetics.
Okay, so propylparaben is another one to keep on the radar then.
You got it.
Okay. Now, for this one, I'm going to need a little help with the pronunciation. What is, and I hope I'm saying this right, azotocarbonamide?
Azotocarbonamide. Yeah, it's a mouthful. You might be surprised to learn it's often found in bread.
Bread. Again. What's it doing in there?
It basically acts as a whitening agent and a dough conditioner. You know how some breads have that perfectly white crumb?
I do, yeah.
Well, azotocarbonamide can be part of how they achieve that.
Huh. The things you learn. But is a pristine white loaf of bread really worth the risk, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the FDA's take on this one? Safe or not?
The FDA maintains that azotocarbonamide is safe at the levels currently used, but like a lot of these ingredients we've been talking about, it's been a bit of a controversial additive for a while. One of the breakdown products of azotocarbonamide is semicarbazide, and that's been linked to tumors in some animal studies.
There's that animal study connection again. Seems to be a recurring theme here.
It does, doesn't it?
So potentially risky in high doses, but the FDA says it's fine in the amounts we typically consume. I don't know, it definitely makes you stop and think twice about just grabbing any processed food off the shelf.
Making informed choices. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But what else do we have on our ingredient list? What's next?
Let's talk about butylated hydroxyanisole, or BHA for short.
BHA, okay, and that's usually found in?
This one's another common preservative. You'll find it in a whole bunch of different foods. It basically helps to prevent them from going rancid and extends their shelf life. Things like edible fats and oils, baked goods, even chewing gum.
Chewing gum. Never would have guessed that one. So it's all about stopping things from going rancid and making them last longer. Sounds innocent enough, right? So what's the catch?
The big concern with BHA is its potential cancer risk. Some studies have shown that high doses can cause cancer in animals.
There's that high doses in animals caveat again. It's like every other ingredient we've talked about.
It's true. It does come up a lot. And again, it's important to remember that what happens in a lab, especially with those really high doses, doesn't always reflect how things actually play out in real life with regular consumption in humans.
Right, of course. So what's the official word on BHA? Is it safe or not?
Here in the U.S., the FDA gives it the green light, generally recognized as safe, remember?
Right, GRAS. But there's always a but, isn't there?
There usually is. So while the FDA says it's fine, at least at the levels currently approved for use, the EU, which is known for being a little stricter when it comes to food regulations, well, they only allow BHA in much lower quantities than we do here.
Interesting. Makes you wonder, if they're being more cautious, shouldn't we be too?
It's a fair question, especially given there's still a lot we don't know about the long-term effects of some of these ingredients. Okay, ready for our last ingredient?
Hit me with it. What's the deal with, and this one's another tongue twister, butylated hydroxytoluene or BHT?
Last but not least, BHT. Like BHA, it's another synthetic antioxidant that's commonly used to keep things fresh, you know that word, prevent spoilage in foods that contain fats and oils.
So BHT and BHA are kind of like partners in crime working together to keep things from going bad. Where do we usually see BHT?
It's pretty common. You'll find it in a variety of foods, cereals, processed foods, even some medications and cosmetics too.
And what about the concerns? Are we looking at the same kind of issues as BHA?
There are some definite parallels. Like with BHA, there have been animal studies that have linked BHT to some potential health concerns, including, you guessed it, cancer.
Not those animal studies again.
I know, right? They're always topping up in these discussions.
So, bottom line, what should we know about BHT? Is it safe to be consuming or what?
As it stands, the FDA says yes, but again, there are always those studies that give us pause. Like some have shown that in high doses, it can potentially disrupt our hormonal balance and have negative impacts on the liver and kidneys.
Okay, so another one to be mindful of then, for sure. This has been a whirlwind. It's amazing how much we just don't even think about when we're at the grocery store, But where does all of this leave us? We've unpacked the what, the ingredients themselves, the concerns, all of it. But what does it all actually mean for our everyday lives and our snacking choices?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've covered a lot of ground, and it's important to bring it all together and really think about what this means for us as consumers.
I don't know about you, but I feel like we've been on a bit of an ingredient overload today. It's a lot to digest, really.
It can feel like drinking from a fire hose, that's for sure. But remember, we're not here to scare anyone. If anything, we want you to feel empowered, We're giving you the knowledge to actually decode those ingredient lists and make choices that you feel good about.
So not panic, but be informed.
Exactly. And keep in mind, the FDA, they're not just ignoring all of this. They're always looking at new research, reevaluating the safety of these ingredients. Remember how they revoked the GRA status of BVO? That tells us something.
That's true. They did take action there. But I'm also hearing from you that just because the FDA hasn't stepped in doesn't mean we shouldn't think twice about consuming something.
You're getting it. It always comes back to weighing those risks and benefits, and those are personal decisions at the end of the day. What I'm comfortable with might be totally different from what you choose, and that's okay.
So being a more aware consumer means not just blindly trusting those labels. Right. We have to do a little homework ourselves.
100%. Don't just glance at that ingredient list and toss it in your cart. Take a minute, actually read it, think about it. If something seems iffy, unfamiliar, a little concerning, do a quick search, see what's out there. What do we know about it?
That's where I get tripped up sometimes. I feel like I need a degree in chemistry just to understand half of what I'm reading.
Oh, tell me about it. And that's why it's so important to remember this is complicated stuff. We're talking about nuanced issues with no easy answers. Even the experts don't always see eye to eye. Remember those differing viewpoints we talked about? Some people think the FDA is doing a bang-up job. Others say we need way stricter regulations.
Yeah, that's the constant back and forth. How much is too much when it comes to what's added to our food?
Exactly. And there we are, right in the middle, trying to make sense of it all. But here's the thing. The more we know, the more we can actually speak up and push for change.
Makes you think about that quote from nutritionist Carrie Lupoli. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if Europe can ban it, why can't we?
Right. And it's not just about banning things for the sake of it. It's about demanding better, setting higher standards for what we allow in our food supply. It's a big conversation.
No kidding.
Okay.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into these controversial ingredients, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with? What's the most important takeaway?
At the end of the day, it's about being an active participant in your own health journey. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, do a little digging, and make choices that you feel good about, that align with your values. Knowledge is power, right?
I love that. Couldn't agree more. A huge thank you to our expert for breaking it all down for us. And to our listeners, as always, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, happy snacking.